Welcome, everybody. I hope you all are well. It's another episode of Love Again podcast, and I'm glad you're here with me, with us. Thank you for rocking with us and taking your time out. Thank you for all the feedback on last week's episode. Thank you for your feedback and your encouragement. And also, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be here. I am not here alone. I have a dear friend of mine, and she took some time out to come and be on the pod, and I'm excited about that. She is a Chicago native. She is a mother. She is an entrepreneur. She is a PR maven. Like, one of the best, and I'm glad she's here with us. I want to introduce to some of you all Deborah Olivia Farmer. Hey,
Hey, what's happening? I'm surprised you didn't give them my pet name you gave me.
hey, it's a great name.
How
How
are
you
you?
doing? I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Wonderful, wonderful. No
Good,
issues, no complaints. All is well.
good, good. Thank you for taking some time out. I really, really appreciate you finding some time in your schedule. I've wanted to talk to you for a while. I was in Chicago, and I think I was in my bank, and I came across I think it was the Chicago Reader, or it was something, and I looked on the front cover of the newspaper, and it's you and another friend of mine, Tamara, on the cover. I was like, "Whoa, this is so cool!" And I read the article, and I was like, "Oh, I really, really like to talk to you about what's going on in your life." Um, but before we get into that, I always start with our guests asking them if you had to give your origin story. If somebody asks you about your beginnings, what's that story, and who are some of the most important people that you've come across in your beginnings?
That's a great question. So taking it back from where it started, I'm just, a girl from the south side of Chicago. I rep the wild, wild hundreds everywhere I go. I like to say that I am a nice blend of Bayesian roots. My dad is from Barbados, and my
Mhm.
mom is from Greenwood, Mississippi. So you got a Southern Island girl going on here.
Mhm.
Again, raised in Chicago, grew up in the business. I work in the media industry, working here in Chicago for two major networks. So I am if I had to say, really connected to my love, which is my love of the media industry and community as well. So that's pretty much where my story started in the south side of Chicago.
So, were your parents, were your dad, was
Hmm.
he first generation migrant to the states, or
Absolutely.
wow, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So he actually came to Chicago by way of Lewisham, London. So he is he's 84 now, and so of course the older he gets, the more stories and questions I have of him, like his whole background and all that. And he was a stowaway. He basically found himself at the bottom of a ship heading over. He was pint-sized young man and basically stowed away and found himself on the other side in Great Britain. And so he basically lived in Lewisham, London for some time, got himself established and then sent back for his family and sent them over. And then he came to Chicago by way of Lewisham, London.
that is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how he landed in Chicago, though. That's a very specific place
Yeah.
to coming from overseas.
Yeah.
Did he tell you why
Well,
Chicago?
you know what? No, and I don't know the answer to that, but I can just tell you to the end of his roots here, being in Chicago. was on the southeast side of Chicago. That's actually where he met my mom. My
Mhm.
dad owned several grocery stores here in Chicago in the late 70s and early 80s. And my mom worked in banking. And so a friend of my dad's introduced him to my mom. She worked for Drexel National Bank.
Mhm.
It's no longer there, but it's on 47th and Drexel. And they got married. And, then I came along. Jackson Park Hospital was where I was born. And pretty much grew up on the southeast side of Chicago, which is where he had many of his businesses, 71st and Jeffrey, 79th and King Drive. Now, again, how he got to Chicago, that's a good question. I need to ask him. I have not asked that question
That's
yet.
a great, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
okay in that answer. And your mom coming up from Mississippi.
Yeah.
Um, it seems like the older we get, that little story is so common
Mm-hmm.
amongst us, right? My family is from West Point, Mississippi,
Okay.
and I was in class one day, and my professor says that Chicago ain't nothing but a suburb of Mississippi.
No, it's true. It's,
And
it's very
I
true.
had to think about it. Like, wait,
It's very true. It's
he's
a great
kind of
migration.
he's
Seriously.
kind of right. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if you're in the north in Chicago, it seemed like there was a pipeline from
Mm-hmm.
wherever you were in Mississippi to Chicago. Was she the first generation, or did her mother come up and
No,
establish the family?
no, my grandmother. It's so funny. Maybe I should have even included that in my origin.
Mhm.
My grandmother, to just consider her the consummate ride or die. I mean,
Mhm.
she came to Chicago in 1963 by herself in an El Dorado, and basically, seriously, she
Of
had eight
course not.
children. 8 children. She left back at Greenwood, and then she found out where she wanted to reside, which is still our family home on 100th and Michigan.
Mhm.
And so she purchased the place, and then and actually even more interestingly enough, she brought my mom up after, because my mom was married, and of course in those times they didn't sell homes to single people. So
Mhm.
my mom, being married, actually purchased the home, and then my grandmother quick deeded it back to herself. She was so gangster. Like, seriously. So she brought the rest of her siblings up with their children, and they then moved them to the west side of Chicago, but my grandmother pretty much planted on the south side and then
Mhm.
brought everyone else up. Yep, solo dolo.
You know what? How resilient those
Hmm.
people were.
Yeah.
That generation of Black people who probably didn't have like a high level of education,
Hmm.
but they understood like something about life and
Hmm.
learned about business. And even in the midst of all the redlining that was happening
Hmm.
during that time specifically, um, for her to have the insight to make those kind of transactions and make sure that she owned something.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and I'll tell you more even into that. I mean, she was so big on it. When I purchased my first home at 26, it was all because of my grandmother. I mean,
mhm,
she was all about owning. She was so proud. I mean, even to the end of, she lived to 96. She purchased her own plot on 67th, which is the cemetery where most of the military and dignitaries are buried. And
mhm.
she's in the mausoleum. Like, she literally would take us.
Oakwood,
No, Oakwood.
yeah,
She would have us to take her there so she could make payments on her. Is it called a mausoleum in the wall?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and make her payments. And so when she passed away at 96, we didn't have to, of course, do typically what sadly Black people do, fighting over the
Mhm.
funeral expenses, because she had taken care of everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a great grandmother too,
Mm-hmm.
and so I totally understand the influence. What was her name?
Melissa Lightning, like Steve
Z.
Lightning. You remember
Yeah,
Steve
right.
Lightning? Yeah, Melissa Lightning. Mm-hmm.
um, I think like you, perhaps I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You grew up in a church
Mm-hmm.
environment,
Yeah.
um, and I'm interested in how that environment where you when you were young, how did it help shape? Um, your ideas and
Mm-hmm.
your ethics and your thoughts about life and community
Mm-hmm.
and all the rest.
That's a very good question. My grandmother actually was one of the founding members of Christ Universal Temple with Reverend Johnny Dr. Coleman, Dr. Reverend Johnny Coleman,
Wow.
and yeah, one of the founding members. So that was
Well, that
really
makes
the
sense.
yeah,
I
the
see
base
it.
of who I am, the foundation that was set. With my grandmother being a member of that church, all of our family members went there. I was baptized by Reverend Coleman. That the foundation was really, you're the thinker that thinks the thought that creates the thing. And so
Mhm.
for us, the thought of, of course, community is very important, but it's really you having a lot to do with your destiny, having being tapped into God, and knowing that of course he's your source, but you too, he gives you free will, he gives you an opportunity too to participate in this thing. And so my grandmother was resilient in that. For
Mhm.
her, she said everything is in divine order. I mean, you would ask her, hey granny, how you doing? Everything's in divine order. I mean, that
Mhm.
was really the foundation that was set, from an early, childhood.
That's a very specific way to grow up in Chicago,
Hmm.
um, in at Christ
Prosperity.
University. Yeah,
Yes, that
it was.
prosperity mindset was real.
Yeah, when I was a kid, um, the idea around, I don't know if anybody said it, but it was like Christ Universal was its own place and
Yeah.
thing, and it was a little separate. And
Hmm.
they may have interpreted like she a witch or she's
Yeah.
something else because she wasn't Pentecostal or she wasn't Baptist.
Baptist, no.
She
Universal.
was yeah, she was
Hmm.
universal, and that was a
Hmm.
different theology.
Hmm.
Um, but what I've grown to realize about Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman is one, she was a great businesswoman. I mean,
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, far ahead.
Way
Uh,
beyond. Yes.
I mean, before the time where it became fashionable for women to be empowered and to
Yes.
run big business like that. She
Hmm.
was a handful of black women, and specifically of
Hmm.
her generation, that just were way ahead of her time. And then the second thing is that um, all the stuff she started, she was talking about with consciousness and the
Yes.
mind and being
Hmm.
one with God, and
Yes.
you are God and God is in you or whatever.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It took me to get older to appreciate that type of thinking.
Hmm.
And I'm interested in growing up in that. How did that kind of ideas about being open and conscious to God and the universe and the universal Christ that extends beyond
Hmm.
our tribe and tradition, did what impact did that have on you as you became a young adult and started doing business and relationships and everything else?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's good. I mean, the thought that, to what you just said, is we're like in partnership with God. And so
Yes.
there is no way for you to sit on the sidelines and complain. No, you are in partnership with God because he gave you, free will. And so that real, I mean, again, I'm talking founding member. So this is my foundation. This is all that
Mhm.
I know. My grandmother did not allow us to say we were sick as kids. I can't I never missed a day of work. I worked at WGN for 11 years. I never missed a day of work. I was never sick. Never sick.
Mhm.
Now, maybe I was sick and didn't know. I don't know. But my point is your mind. It's really just a matter of you being able to move
Right.
things based on your thoughts. And so
Right.
that's really how I do business,
Mhm.
relationships, even to the end of, and which we'll talk to, I'm sure, is the adoption of my son. Just having that thought to know that, as grandmother would say, everything's in divine order, but really
Mhm.
being of the thought that you can manifest things.
Mhm.
You can really bring things forth by way of your thinking and your words. The
Mhm.
power of the word. Like
Mhm.
what you say, you just have no idea. Sometimes I have to really be mindful of what I say because I go back and think of things that I said years ago and how they've come to fruition. I'm like, wait a minute, I said this and here it is. And so it just really shaped me for who I am.
Um, it's so. My next question that I ask everyone is, where did your first ideas about love come from?
Mm,
Um, who who helped you define what love is, or did you do that on your own? You saw love, and then you put words and ideas around it. And where, like, your first idea, where did you first see
hmm
love being demonstrated?
Yeah, now this is going to seem very ironic and contradictory to everything I just said about my
Hmm.
grandmother, but I didn't learn that from her. I will tell you, I did in the sense of, is ethos just, just how can I put it? Relationally, I didn't get that from her because she would tell us, and this is so sad, what's love got to do with it?
Hmm.
So, I'm sure because of her experiences, she lost her mom at a young age and, she had 8 children, single mom, many of them, different dads. So she did not have, I believe, as I'm investigating more of her story in my later years, because it's connected to my level of love on the way that she told us love had nothing to do with it. Like, she would tell you literally flat footed, if you're in a relationship and it's come to an end, she said, you once didn't know him. And so that's harsh. So I did not learn that from her. I learned it from my dad. My dad, I'm a true daddy's girl. The level of commitment that he had to providing, probably had a lot to do with my level of interpretation of love because I believe love is an action. It's not what you're saying, it's what you're doing. And so my dad, very much, was a good model and is a good model for me in that regard. So I would say I learned that from my dad. Um, my dad and my mom, although they divorced when I was young, but they still talk every day. Like I'm, 49 years old. He doesn't have a need to send her diaper money or milk money. And they're, my point is they're still friends, and so that's what love is. I believe that, to the end of the way that he loved his family back home in Barbados, providing for them and providing for my mom and myself. I learned that from him. Sadly, not from my grandmother, but I believe she did not have a good guide, and so she
Right.
just was coming from a place maybe of pain, and focused in other ways.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say that because sometimes we think in any of our relationships sometimes that we need to get everything out of this one person, right?
Hmm
But really, our lives are made up of this tapestry of people who touched us, who gave us a little bit of this, and then
hmm
somebody else gave me a little bit of this, and somebody else gave me a little bit of this, and to I think it's mature to contextualize our parents, their parents, and why they made the decisions that they
Yeah.
made, and
hmm
what what decisions that they had as options, right? Like
hmm
sometimes the only options was between bad and worse.
No,
And
no, and that's a good point because I talked to one of my aunts. My grandmother had four girls and 4 boys. My mom is the oldest girl, and literally they're all 2 years apart. And so, as I was starting to really, do some deep work on myself with regards to relationships, I'm like, wow, my goodness, I've been in a lot of relationships. But it's not. I don't want to say a generational curse, but it is. I mean, my grandmother had, 8 children, and truthfully, with 6 different men. And
mhm,
so, to your point, I talked to one of my aunts who I like look at as a historian of the family. she said where they live, those were the only options for the men. So she doubled back. Like she have a couple, like my mom and my aunt have the same dad. So she doubled back twice on a couple brothers. Like seriously.
Spent the
But
block. Yeah, she.
no, seriously. But and I would make fun when I would like talk to my brother and my cousins with, multiple relationships that we had. But my aunt said, she said those are really the only options that they had where they lived. you know,
No,
so
no, that's totally fair. I think when we understand them and put them in context, I think
hmm
it helps us to understand them and
yeah, show them
their
some
decision
grace.
makers and what shaped their personality and
hmm
the way she had to be in order to survive, right?
Yes,
Like,
yes.
I'm sure having 8 kids or whatever, she couldn't afford to for it to be about love all the time, right? She
No,
gotta,
no.
you gotta do what you gotta do. So
Yes.
I'm interested in as you become a teenager and
hmm
a young adult, and you start dating or go away to college.
hmm
How did it, did what you received as a definition of love? How was that applied to your early relationships? And
hmm
um, how did you deal with the first time that it didn't work out, like
hmm
the when it doesn't end in the fairy tale? Like,
Yeah.
how did you deal with that very early on for yourself?
Yeah, that's good. So it was really it's so funny. Like I'm just discovering, and I'm sure that people do this. The older we get, the more wisdom we have, the more we connect with decisions we made. I'm sorry, it's a little loud now.
Mhm.
Decisions we made in the past. My first time having that happen was in college. My college love, and that not coming to pass for me was devastating. And so it took some time to get over that. Um, but again, I think it was really just connecting to my grandmother and like, what's love got to do with it? Move on. You once didn't know him. And so I believe that I then became very rigid when it came to future relationships. So it was like if it wasn't heading in the direction that I wanted it to head, I would next deuces, and that really wasn't love.
Mhm.
For me to realize that I broke many a hearts along the way because of this rigid way that I had with regards to what I thought I was looking for at the time. So yeah, I mean, I'm still really truthfully, I love the title of your pod, Love Again, because that is something that at 49 I am really trying to understand better is love, because I just wonder, do we really have the answers to it? I think it's a discovery. I think it's a constant tweaking and trying to to lay it down right, and so but that was my first experience with it not becoming what I wanted it to be, and just having to get over that and move on.
Yeah, as I've gotten older and tried to define love for myself and what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What do I need from love?
hmm
I think for me, I had to go back like to the basics and to decide for myself what love is not.
mm,
Love is, if I don't know what it is, I know what it's not, right? It's not
hmm
this. And there's something, and I know it's a great song, like when Michael says that love is not possession, right?
mm, hmm
I think we may have missed how wise that is, right?
Yeah. hmm
That because I love you doesn't mean that I own you
Own you. Yeah.
or I possess you, which means that you're free at any moment to to
Change your
leave,
mind.
to go, yeah, to change your
Yeah.
mind,
Yes.
to change your mind about me, to change your mind about us,
That's good.
and I have to be able to live in that vulnerability
If that
because
can happen, that's good.
yeah, because I don't because I love you doesn't give me ownership of you. And I think, and I've applied this to death and to grief for myself. Um,
Hmm.
because I see the when relationships end, we said we broke up, with so and so, or we got divorced from so and so. But more literally, um, we experienced the loss of a loved one, just as if they died,
No, it's
right?
true. Hmm.
We're grieving, like, and when someone's in your life, whether it's your grandmother, I was extremely close to my grandmother, my father, people that I love, they're a part of my cellular existence. Like I
Hmm.
like I and on one level I am one with them, and for me not to have them totally disrupts how I identify and feel safe and
Hmm.
feel secure. But even in that, my father passed away, my grandmother passed away, I've had people I really love pass away. I don't own them either.
Hmm.
And so it's like I could spend the rest of my life jumping up and down, being angry, um, pouting. Like today is the eighth anniversary of my dad passing
Hmm.
away.
I'm sorry.
And it's like I could spend the rest of my life being pissed that he's not here, or I
Hmm.
could spend the rest of my life being thankful that I had him as long as I had him, and I had
Yeah.
more of a father than a lot of people get.
No, that's good.
And I think I would rather spend my life being grateful for that than being in anguish because my security blanket's not here, or it's not fair and all the like. I think that's
Hmm.
corrosive. I found it to be corrosive.
Yeah.
It takes
Okay.
a lot of energy. So,
Yeah, that's a good discovery. I mean, I think, one thing you just said, which the possession piece is good. Like, to have this space. And I guess for me, I'm going to show myself some grace because I think I was a little bit hard on myself in these last couple of years when doing the rewind, right?
mhm.
Because I would be just okay, like next, and so I would feel like, well, dag, did you really love anyone? Like, how could you do that? But to your point, I didn't own them. They had the right to end it, or I had the right to end it, and we just need to be good with that and to move on. That's good.
Yeah, and it's not that it's easy, right? You
Yeah,
you may have to talk yourself into over
yeah,
some time
true.
to get to that. But I just felt I think I got to a point where I realized I'm spending too many days in pain, right?
Mm,
Just anguishing over this, and um, even if we had love and someone moves on, we could say I'm angry. This isn't fair. This wasn't right. The way you treated me and how you handled me, and that may be all justified. But then we also could say, well, for however long we were together, I had love in my life.
yes.
I had someone who cared about me. I had someone to spend time with. I had someone to be affectionate with. And even though that didn't last as long as I wanted it to last, I had it, which is more than what most people had during
Well,
that
and
time.
that's my philosophy, and it always has been. And I think now again, I'm thank you for saying this because I can show myself some grace because that's how I look at it. I don't have the wallow moments. I don't have I consciously uncoupled. I don't know if you knew this, and in that, I mean, it's been 3 years, and you know what, it happened. And so in that, it's a matter of realizing what you just said, the gratitude that you should have that you actually had that experience. Some people never have that experience. I have girlfriends that have never, ever had a real relationship. And
Mhm.
so the fact that you had one and it ended, just be grateful for what you got out of it when you had it. I'm always one to say, I get what I'm supposed to have when I'm supposed to have it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so just having that understanding that, it may not last a lifetime. I hate to be cliche about it. They say the lifetime and the season. Just be grateful for however long you have it. And it may just be for a season. It may be for you to get something at that moment.
Yeah,
But that's
So
that Johnny Coleman mindset. I'm sorry.
no, 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 and that's great.
That's
And
all I know.
we probably should have been listening to her a
Yeah,
long time ago because she
yeah,
was right about
yeah.
so many of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so after that, you process that. I'm interested in how you found yourself wanting to be a mother.
Mhm.
I'm fascinated by maternal yearnings because it's so other
Mm.
than
Yeah.
me, um, and how you found adoption as a viable way to love and
Mhm.
to establish relationship. How did that come about for you?
Yeah. So, I'm a natural nurturer. I've always been a mother. My cousin and I are 2 years apart, and we used to play house as kids. And my grandmother would say, "Well, let Nikki be the mama." And I said, "Well, it's going to be two mamas." Like I wasn't giving it up. So, always been a mother. And so I found myself in my 20s. I was mentoring a young lady that I met in foster care. And that was when I realized I wanted to be a mother. I actually wanted to adopt her. She was in foster care, was sort of bounced around from different situations. And I was too young at the time, single, and advised not to do it. But I always knew that was something I wanted to go back and do. And so, life happens. Those desires to be a mom don't just die. Of course, I married later in life. And so, in that, that other conversation which wasn't had, was that, fertility piece, that biological clock ticking. That's 35 and ticking is a real thing. And
Mhm,
so I wanted to wait until I got married to have children.
mhm,
And when that time happened, my time expired. So
mhm,
adoption became the option, not the only option. It wasn't a fallback in any way because I always knew I wanted to do that, but it just
mhm,
became my only option at the time.
mhm,
And so, to the end of my son, I actually adopted him through foster care. He was a foster child first, and even in that, the thought of adopting a child through foster care is risky, But of course, having that mindset I had, I went into it knowing that they were not going to return the child back to home because that's the objective with
mhm.
foster care is to return the children back to their natural family habitat, if you will. And so in that,
I never knew
um,
that.
yeah, that's the adoption. That's the primary goal of foster care is to
Okay.
return the foster children back to, you're just literally fostering them until
Mhm.
whatever situation they came from gets well. And so in this case, that
Never knew
wasn't to,
that.
yeah. So it was
Mhm,
risky for me to even choose that as an option, not to do private adoption. Some people tend to go straight private adoption, but I wanted to adopt through foster care.
mhm,
And when we got the call, my son's name is Joshua. He was 4 days old, and so he pretty much has been with me since birth,
mhm,
and but he was a foster child of mine for a year until his
mhm,
bio dad's rights were terminated.
mhm,
And nothing but the grace of God that happened because that doesn't always happen, And so
mhm,
another add to the story is his bio mom actually passed away.
mhm,
She passed away like a couple days after, giving birth and
mhm,
at home. She had him at home. They took him to the hospital. She passed away.
mhm,
And so, not to make light of her passing, but that's nothing I have to be concerned with,
mhm,
with telling him his story. Because I share with him that he's, adopted. He's very well aware
mhm,
because I don't want it to be a negative for him. I don't want him to find out in some shocking way
mhm,
because that's typically what we do in the Black community is we keep secrets, and I wanted to make certain that I did not do that to him.
mhm.
But yeah, that's pretty much how it came about. I mean, this is something that I think it was in the 90s that I was introduced to foster care through the young lady I was mentoring, and so this is the path I chose.
Um, I'm sure during the process, you had something in the back of your head. What if this doesn't work out, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I'm interested in what you told yourself to kind of keep yourself emotionally focused on what you
Hmm.
need to do, because I'm sure you can't presently give care uh, to your fullest.
Mm-hmm.
If you're always thinking about in the back of your head, well, they could come any day now, and
Yep.
this could all be over. How did you work through that for yourself to get to the end?
Yeah, that's good. I never thought about it. I did not ever think for one moment that God was going to do that to me, that they were going to come in to take my child from me. So it's funny because when is it, can you hear that noise?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
you're good.
So when we were going through the process, of course, again, the caseworkers coming to the home, checking and all, and to your point, yes, they could have at any moment taken him away. But I didn't believe that would ever happen. I didn't think that God would do that to me. And in my head, I didn't even convince myself to even be concerned with that. And to give you a funny story, when my friends and I were actually shopping for items for him, and I was going to do a baby shower, one of my girlfriends was like, why are you doing a baby shower? Like, you do know that they could take this child back. And I was like, girl, you sound crazy. Like, I don't know what you're listening to and what you're on, but that's not for me to even consume myself with. So I never thought about it, not one time. Not one time.
Um, so I'm also interested in how you connect with this life that is outside of your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and my women in my life would have to tell me that being pregnant, right, and carrying a child to term is an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not by default that every mother falls in love with the child, even though they had the child, right? I've seen
Mm-hmm.
mothers really struggle
Mm-hmm.
sometimes to connect with children that they birth. I would think that it would be not more of a struggle, or at least a different struggle for a life, not to have that experience, but now the life
Yeah.
is here and you have to connect. Did you worry about? Did you worry about connecting? Did um, and when you connected and how you connected, what did that feel like for you?
Yeah. You know, truthfully, ignorance is bliss. I did not think about it. It's not like I even had a handbook to even know. This
Hmm.
was something that I just, flat-footed made a decision to do and didn't really have any thought that, oh, he's not going to connect. I'm not going to connect. I just knew when they, told us that we can come meet him. He was 4 days old and he was in NICU for a couple of days. And so
Hmm.
he came home literally like in the first week, and he's always been this close since the beginning. And so, although I didn't go through the birthing process, I really had no other thought but knowing that this was my child, and then I would be able to connect. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even have an understanding of not connecting.
Hmm.
And it's interesting. I mean, that's a good question, but I just never gave it any thought. I just knew that this was my son, and we bonded. And
Hmm.
of course they tell you to go through the physical bonding, put them close to your chest, all those types of
Hmm.
things. So it's like
Hmm.
really my heartbeat, although he, I'm sure, may remember the heartbeat of his bio moms, but he knows my heartbeat. I mean, he's been close to my heart since he's been in our lives.
Um, what that decision kind of goes against a cultural stereotype uh,
Mm-hmm.
for on two levels, right? That you chose to be a single mom. You chose to do this. And I think more times than not, the narrative in our culture is that if she's a single mom, it was an accident, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you chose to take this route on purpose. So that's
Mm-hmm.
a different way of being in the world and empowering yourself. And then the second thing, you chose a son, right?
Well, if I can just add to that, actually, so let me give you some backstory. So I was going through the process to foster as a single person, okay, and I
Mhm,
wanted a little girl. I lived in
mhm,
Beverly. I had a pink room already painted and ready, okay.
mhm,
And by the time I got my foster care license, I then got engaged, and so at that point, then I went through this process as a engaged person, then a married person. And so My initial request was for a girl, but then when I, you know, became coupled, then I became open because you know why? They kept
Mm,
calling us with boys. They
mm,
only kept calling with boys or families of like 3 and 4 kids. So at
mm,
that point, I had to get out of my own way and not try to control the situation. And
mm.
I'll never forget my oldest brother said to me, he said, do you want to be a mom or do you want to be a mom of a little girl? So at that point, I had to be open to a boy.
That's a
And
great
when I
question.
tell you, it was the best decision I ever made because I will tell you to the end of your pod, I learned love through my son. Like I
Mm,
literally learned love through Joshua.
mhm.
And so, and I believe God, in His infinite wisdom, like as my grandmother would say, everything's in divine order. This was ordained. Like it was for me to learn love through this little boy, because a boy and their mom. I mean, you already know.
Yeah, I do.
You
I
already
do.
know.
Um, I'm interested in how you're experiencing raising a young black boy in America um,
Hmm.
right now. Uh,
Hmm.
and right now, you're in the South right now, so that's
Okay.
it's a different experience.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how you think about his life and what your aspirations is for him, and
Hmm.
to know as a parent all the world around him, makes him vulnerable in some
Hmm.
ways. How do you empower him?
Hmm.
I don't know if a route could be to shield him from
Hmm.
the impending danger or the world around him, or to empower him in it. I'm interested in how you've done that for yourself and
Hmm.
did that for him.
Yeah. So partly, the first thing I did was I moved. I was, at the time, like I said, married, and we consciously uncoupled. And so it's so funny when you just try to make plans, as they say. Really, God is like, which is just knock it off. Let me handle this here. And I ended up where I started. Like literally, I was going this path as a single person, and now I'm a single person raising a boy. Which I'm like, what in the world? And so in that, I have just decided to just sort of surround him with the support that I need because I'm not here to try to make him be a man. I can't do that. I don't have the capacity to do that. So I just surround him with positive male figures to help me navigate this process with him.
Mhm.
I very much empower him. He's a very strong-willed kid. And so even in that, just allowing him to be a kid and not letting him be exposed to so much, with of course these phones and technology and all that. I mean, there's it's oh my God, you're competing with a lot of stimuli.
Right.
And then of course now being in Georgia and it's very colorful there and it's a lot of things. And so I just really just make my best effort to just have conversations with him and don't expose him to too much too soon, but definitely don't um, put him in a bubble in a sense
Yeah.
where, because that's not realistic.
Right.
So,
I have a couple of more questions. I'm gonna let you go, but I
okay.
just want to put a pin right here and tell him. I want you to tell him that there are more HBCUs than Morehouse, and
Yes. Oh,
just
that's funny. You
because,
you saw the Morehouse post, right?
yeah,
He loves Morehouse.
yeah, I get it. There's more. There's
Yes,
more than
yes,
that,
yes,
and
yes.
you know, uh, if you want to be the best, you have to go to the best. So,
Okay,
and
okay.
that ain't in Georgia. That ain't in Atlanta. So that's all.
Touche, touche. Okay. I love it.
Um, when I met you, we met 20 years ago, something like that,
Yes, it's a
almost.
minute. It's been a minute.
Yeah, you were at WGN.
I
You were
was.
working. You were doing community relations and a couple of other things. I'm interested in how, and you do public relations now, and you do work in Atlanta, which you could talk about. I'm interested in how that track came about for you, and
Mm-hmm.
that whole space of either journalism or relations, public relations,
Mm-hmm.
marketing. How did you find yourself into that?
Yeah, yeah. So we had a radio and television program in high school,
Mhm.
and so that was when I was first interested in the media field industry. And so I went to college. I'm a radio and television broadcasting degree. And so just having that hands-on experience on campus, I had my own radio show. My radio's name was Diva. I was on from 12 to 3 in the morning, playing the old school, love tunes overnight. And then I went to work for WGN. And so after working at WGN over to NBC, the story about being Mary Jane, I'm not sure if you ever saw that with Gabrielle Union. That's a real story for Black women in the business. And so I found myself really tapped out. Like, there was no real, I felt, space for me to grow. And so I just jumped out. I mean, we had new management came in, made things really uncomfortable for me. So I just jumped out and really went to go into real estate because I was disenchanted with the media industry. And that never happened for me. I kept getting phone calls from people that knew I was, a free agent. And that's how my business started. And so it was really just out of a place of need, just, having the experience in media and community engagement, community relations, and really just building a business model around that. And so, pretty much how I sort of, look at what we do is we solve problems, we address issues, and meet needs. And so most times I get clients that call that are like in dire need of help. Right now I'm working on a project with the city recruitment for the Chicago Fire Department, helping them to find Black and brown people to become firemen. We did that same campaign for the police department. So right now, living in Atlanta, I haven't really started working there yet because I still have, clients in Chicago, but I plan to get connected there. It will probably be more on the political side because, as you know, in the South, especially in Atlanta, it's a very heavily influenced community and politics. And so, yeah, I'm sure that's once I get ready to start working in that space, that's the area I'll be working
Last question before we finish up with some more questions. But this
in.
last,
Okay, sure, sure, sure.
I think that as I've observed it, there's an unfair tax levied against single women who
Mm-hmm,
have a career
mm-hmm,
and have a home, and when I say home, I
mm-hmm,
mean children or husband, right? And there is this, um, sometimes overt and sometimes covert, this idea that a woman, if you're successful in business, that means you're not doing or covering the bases in other areas, especially when it comes to family relationships. I'm interested, did you ever feel that? And if you didn't, how do you balance that? And how have you carved that out for yourself? Because there's a lot of women, single women, listen, who are trying to do the same thing and trying to get it, wrap their mind around not being neglectful and kind of pushing off guilt of not being everywhere all the time to do when you have a business or you're working. How do you balance that out for yourself?
Um, it is a delicate balance. I think that what I found, and this even can connect to the adoption piece, I'll never forget. When I was single, I was talking to one of my peers, and she said to me, Black women are the most educated, most successful, but really the unhappiest. And I was like, wow, that's a bit harsh. And she was really coming from a place of saying that we don't do what we need to do for our own happiness. So to the end of, if you want a relationship, as much focus as you put on getting a degree, why don't you put that focus on, putting yourself in a space of being available to relationships? Um, And the same to be said for, you know, I just find that we tend to put ourselves, and this is not the case for all, but second when we should be first, right? So if you want to, have a family, or if you want to have children, you should go for those things. You shouldn't, suppress that desire to fulfill that need. I think on the end of once that happens and balancing that out is just realizing that you just got to really be intentional. I think there's a time where, for women, I think we do a good job of, women's retreats and, girls trips and things of that sort. And so I think you can still balance and do those things as well as, continue to grow in your industry and your career as well. But you just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you're doing a great job at it,
Thank
and
you. Thank you.
I'm so happy that you found this space for yourself. Motherhood looks great on you,
Thank
and
you. I love it.
I'm glad. I'm so glad you have that for yourself, and everything is in divine order.
It
It's absolutely, I
it,
believe
it,
that.
it is. I mean, it is. Just surrender to that.
Absolutely. So before I let you go,
Yes.
for all the guests, I do a quick 5 questions, right? Bam,
Okay.
bam.
Rapid fire. Let's do it.
You're good. I mean, you can handle this. Okay. First question. Do you believe in love at first sight?
Yes.
Okay. Um, what has love taught you?
Patience and grace.
Mm, mm, great answer. Um, what do you believe about love now that you didn't then?
That it never dies.
Mm, great. Next question. What makes a good lover?
A thoughtful person. Um, uh, a considerate person.
Mm,
Um, and a selfless person.
absolutely. Last question. What brings you joy?
Love. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding.
That's
Um,
fine. I mean, that's fine.
family, friends, a good meal, a
Mhm,
good movie.
mhm, mhm. That's wonderful. That's awesome. That's great. Deborah, Olivia Farmer, everybody. Thank you
No, thank you.
for taking some time out and being with us. I learned a lot, so I appreciate that. If people wanted to reach out to you or connect with you on social media to find out about fostering or need some PR assistance, consulting work, where can they find you?
Sure. So my Instagram is the Olivia Farmer. That's where you can catch me there. For the adoption, I do have two websites you can visit. My Journey to Joshua. That's My Journey to Joshua. And then the other is Black Adoption Matters. Black
Okay.
Adoption Matters. You sound
Okay.
like Darius Love Hall from Love Jones, just so you know. Darius Love Hall, everyone.
Is that good or is
That
that
was
good?
Lorenz. That's Lorenz Tate character. That's a good
So
thing.
that's okay.
It's a good thing.
All right. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for
No,
coming
thank
on.
you. Thank you for the
All the best.
invitation. I had a
You gotta
great
come
time.
back. You gotta come
I will.
back.
I would love that. I would love it. Thank you for the invitation. This was fun.
No problem. All right, everybody. Thank you all. See you next week for another episode. Be safe, be happy, and I'll see you on next week. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.